everybody. Welcome back to Using My Story. Today, we have an exciting interview with Faith with Vivian. Well, Vivian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
You're doing good. So, you guys might not know, but Vivian has a really cool channel. You have a lot of subscribers on YouTube. And what do you guys talk about?
I have a faith channel, so I really just talk about God and I share my life and my struggles and just help other Christians or anyone that's searching for God and wants to get closer to Him. So that's really what I share on my channel.
Nice. I'm excited to bring you on because I know that we bring on a lot of people who struggled and a lot of people who are working in treatment or in the field, but it's good for people to see somebody that was in addiction or in that part of a lifestyle doing good and being an influencer now. So tell us real quick about what your drug of choice was.
Well, I went to multiple ones, but I would say if I was addicted to any, it was probably alcohol. And that was one that I relied on a lot to have a good time and even to just feel numb to whatever I was going through. But I did go into ecstasy and Molly, MDMA, cocaine, and marijuana, but mainly alcohol. And I grew up with my dad being an alcoholic and my grandpa being an alcoholic. So I grew up around it and I never thought that I would be like them. And I always wanted to not be like them. And I ended up being just like them.
I
So
can relate to that for sure. So how long have you been sober?
I've been sober for 3 years now. So 2020 was the last time that I drank.
Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about your childhood. So you said your dad would drink and your grandpa would drink.
Mhm.
What was it like growing up?
So growing up, my parents are divorced, and the reason why they divorced, my mom, the reason my mom told us that they are divorced is because he was an alcoholic, and she even said that she never married my dad through the church because she knew that he would never stop drinking and that she would eventually want to leave him. And growing up, I did see my dad drinking, and he wouldn't just drink at parties and dude, like just one night, it was like weeks at a time. He would have to get up, not go to work. Um, Very emotional. My dad's not emotional, but when he would get drunk, he was very emotional. He would say things that he shouldn't be telling kids, like telling us things about my mom. When he'd get really, really drunk, he'd call me by my mom's name when I was older, like around 18. He would call me my mom's name because he was so drunk. He thought I was my mom, and he'll tell me I'm sorry for everything. And yeah, it was a lot growing up with that. And my grandpa, he was a little bit like even more than my dad, and he actually drank up until he died. Um,
Wow.
he was to the point where there couldn't be perfume bottles, rubbing alcohol, anything that could get him drunk. He would drink it. So they would have to take everything away from him. And he actually lived a pretty long time, 83, I believe he was. But when he passed away, he was drunk and he injured his head. And that's how he passed away from the injury. They
Wow.
said it wasn't from the alcohol, and then he had a good liver, which I don't know how, but they said he passed away from the injury to his head.
Wow.
And yeah, I grew up and I saw my grandpa drunk, and my dad would go over to Arkansas where he lived. And I remember one time my dad was supposedly taking care of my grandpa when he was drunk, and then my dad ended up being drunk. So my dad and my grandpa were both super drunk for like a week straight. And yeah, it was a lot to grow up with. And growing up around that, I just kind of really put a lot of walls up and guarded myself from even ever showing emotion. When my dad was drunk, I wouldn't really cry,
Mm.
and I would just be super serious. And I would see my sister crying, my stepmom crying, and I just wouldn't say anything. So I bottled up a lot from growing up around that and being around that. And even till this day, my dad still struggles with it. He's had like I think the longest he's gone sober is maybe 3 years. When I moved in with my dad, he was sober, and I moved in with him in high school. I think I was in 11th grade. I moved in with him, and he was doing great, and he ended up getting drunk finally after 3 years, and that's when I decided to leave from living with my dad. And yeah, so it's been a lot since I was a little girl.
How old were you when you first drank?
Well, I was little. I was a little girl. Like I think I was in 8th grade. So
Wow.
how old is that? 12, 13?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Mm,
like between 11
yeah,
and
I
13.
was little.
What would you drink?
Anything. When you're young, you don't know. So Like anything we put in a water bottle, whatever was clear, and we would drink. No chaser, no nothing, just drinking it.
At
Like,
11, 12?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So what about like tell us about the first time? Because I know there's people watching, like there's some people watching that have 11, 12 year olds, and they never would think that they would be drinking. But what was that first time like? How did you get in that situation?
So I liked. So my parents, they don't talk to each other. So whenever I wanted to go somewhere and be gone for like a weekend, hey mom, I'm going to my dad's house.
Mm,
Hey dad, I'm not coming over this weekend. I'm gonna stay with my mom.
got it.
So I ended up just going to a friend's house, and that friend, like her parents, weren't very responsible. They'll let their kids do whatever, and they were very young. They all used to drink and smoke, very young, like that age, and I ended up sleeping over their house, and I think they took their parents' alcohol. I don't think they knew what we were doing. They were just thought we were having a good time. And we just were in the room and we started drinking and just dancing and having fun like little kids. And yeah, the next day was horrible. I was like 13 years old with a hangover the next day.
Wow.
And I remember saying like I never want to drink again. That was horrible. Like I don't know why people drink, but of course, that's how it started. And yeah, I can't really remember it that much, but I just remember I lied to my parents. I said that I was going over um, to their houses, and I just went over to my friend's house, and we all just drank in a room and hung out, and that's how it started.
So what was your favorite thing about the alcohol?
Was one, feeling happy, and two, just being able to forget everything. So this is like just forgetting about any problems, anything that I was going through.
And you already, even though you were young, you still had a lot of problems to deal with. You still had your parents separated, your dad wasn't around. So that was a big escape for you with the alcohol.
Yeah,
What was that hangover, that first hangover? What did that feel like?
horrible. I remember the next day the parents were like, "Come on, we're gonna go to the mall, and you guys could do your shopping," because we were bugging that we wanted to go to the mall, and all of us were like, "No, we don't want to go. Like, we just want to stay here," and we didn't do anything the next day from how horrible we felt.
What do you think if a parent is trying to identify if if their child is drinking or struggling? What are some signs you think they could look out for?
I think one, if they don't share any feelings or emotions about how they're feeling or what they're going through, that's a huge red flag. Because
Okay.
growing up, my parents never knew if I was happy, if I was sad, if I was
Mm,
going through anything. They knew nothing about my personal life. They knew nothing that was going on at school, just kind of like very transactional relationship. And if you have a transactional relationship with your kids, you don't even know what's going on in their head or what they're going through, who their friends are. And yeah, just even
yeah.
knowing who they're around, and just looking at the parents too, because some parents are not that responsible with their kids. And those were the kids that I would hang out with.
That's real.
Yeah.
Some parents aren't that responsible with their kids, and those are the kids I would hang out with.
Yeah.
That's real. So when you were drinking, when you got to the height of your alcoholism and you got to like the heaviest in your drinking, how much were you drinking per day?
I would say it was I for sure was like a weekend person at first. I was doing it when we would go out Friday, Saturdays, Sundays, sometimes with my friends. So 3 days was like the most I would go. But during COVID, when we were all locked down, I couldn't even believe that I got the way I got, because I always said I only socially drink and I only do it with my friends and I only do it to have fun. But now I'm like locked up in a house with my dad
Mm,
and my stepmom and my 2-year-old daughter. And every night I was drinking. I always had either two wine bottles, or I would have like a bottle underneath my bed. That's where I would keep it. And it was just every night until I got drunk enough to go to sleep, or just until I felt that buzz, or
yeah.
just felt drunk. And yeah, it was every night. And that's when I knew I had a problem, because I always said it's not a problem if I'm out and I'm with my friends and I'm having a good time, but now I'm just here in my room, depressed, drinking every night. with my 2-year-old daughter in the room.
Wow. How did that feel to be drinking with your daughter like that in the room?
It felt horrible, and I even was smoking too, because I used to have a wax pen with me, and that's when I knew it got really bad because I never used to come home drunk to my daughter. I never used to do anything around her. So I knew at that point, I'm like, I really do have a problem and I need to do something about it. And yeah, I didn't feel good. I felt like I was being a horrible mom. And I was so not, I was present because I was with her all the time, but then I was not present because I was relying so much on alcohol and weed to just disassociate from everything going on in my life and the way that I felt. And I even got to the point I never drank and drove with my daughter in the car, but I got to the point where I was driving with her and I was smoking
Mm.
at the same time. So, yeah, it didn't feel good, and thinking about those times, I really look back and I feel almost like not sorry, but just it's just sad to think that I
Mm.
couldn't talk to anybody about what I felt and what I was going through, and that I had to rely on those substances to even feel okay in that time.
Let's talk about the weed a little bit because a lot, man, you would be, well, you might be surprised or you might not, but there's some weed smoking activists. They will straight up, if I say anything about weed, they just get emotional and they go, "No, weed's not a gateway drug. Weed's not a drug.
No,
No, I could stop anytime." But talk about that a little bit. Like, just be honest. Do you feel like weed isn't something you can get addicted to? And talk about escaping from reality and how all that works together.
weed is definitely the gateway drug for sure. Because for one, I don't ever think I would have tried any drugs if I didn't try weed first. But weed is for sure something you could get addicted to. And I've had seasons where I was smoking a little bit, and then I've had seasons where I was smoking a lot, like every single night. And you could for sure get addicted to it. There was this time in my life where I was going through a really bad breakup, and like it was like a heartbreak season for me. And during that time, every night, I remember I would be smoking, and I relied on it so much. I would smoke every single night with one of my best friends at the time, and I didn't feel normal. I didn't feel okay until I was high.
Hmm.
And yeah, you could for sure get addicted to it. That's probably on my list. The second one I was addicted to was weed, and that's the one that was the most like from drugs, probably the one I did the most. Alcohol, yes, but the one that I did more casually was weed.
Hmm.
I felt like it was okay to drive when I was high. I felt like it was okay to go to work when I was high. I felt like I could do anything when I was high. So I didn't see a problem with it. But in reality, I was just addicted to the feeling of it.
Driving high is crazy. I remember driving so stoned, like I felt like I was in a video game, and
Yeah.
like everything in my mind is like, "Bro, you're gonna crash. You're gonna crash. You're gonna crash." And then like, I'm not the shortest guy in the world, but either way, I scooted up my seat like super close to the steering wheel, and I was like, I was just trying to get there, and I felt like for sure I was stoned out of my mind trying to drive. It's dangerous.
Yeah, it definitely is. It really is. It does feel like a video game. I always used to tell myself I'm a better driver when I was high, but because I'm a pretty bad driver sober, if I'm being honest. But when I was high, I was just like so cautious, going the speed limit, staying in my lane, putting on the light, looking. But when I was sober, I was just like crazy, like move, I'm just going, like
That's funny.
yeah.
So talk about your rock bottom. What was your rock bottom like?
Man, my rock bottom was for sure that season I talked about um, during COVID. Well, I feel like I've had two rock bottoms. So my first rock bottom was when I was doing a lot of MDMA and
Mhm.
cocaine and alcohol every weekend. The people I hung out with were very into that lifestyle, and it was in that group of
Was it
friends.
like a rave, like
Yes,
clubbing, or was it like clubbing or like raving?
it was raving and it was clubbing slash bars in West Hollywood. So in that in those group of people, that circle, it's very normal. It's
Yeah,
like weird if you don't pop pills.
yeah,
It's very normal to pop pills. It's very normal to do cocaine. It's very normal to do that every weekend. And I remember I started hanging out with those group of people, and it got pretty bad. I couldn't even recognize myself because at this time I was a mom. My daughter was not even a year old yet when I got into it. But basically, we would go to raves and we would, do our Molly, our ecstasy, whatever. But then it got to the point we were out in the bars in West Hollywood. We befriended a drug dealer,
mm,
and when we would roll in West Hollywood, it wasn't ever really like planned. We saw this guy. We used to call him eyebrows because he had thick eyebrows. So we would see eyebrows. like yeah, like his we would call him eyebrows every time we see him, like, oh my gosh, guys, it's eyebrows. And like we would see him and all my friends would look at each other and be like, man, like I guess we're gonna have to roll today because eyebrows is here. And every time we saw him, of course, we would buy a pill, and I don't know what he would sell us, but we would split the pill, and it was strong. Like we would roll off like cutting a pill in fours. So every time we saw him, we would get pills, and this was a point in my life right before COVID started. So this is when it was like it was normal to be out and stuff. So we were popping pills every weekend, which is not normal. It's normal to do it at raves, not saying that it's normal, but it's normal to do it at raves, but like every weekend's kind of a lot. And I remember that when I started doing it consistently, I started getting like suicidal thoughts, which is something I never dealt with. And I even used to think people that dealt with suicide, it was like weird because I had no understanding about mental health. And until I went through this, I understood like, oh, dang, like people really deal with this. Like it's real. And I remember I would get a lot of suicidal thoughts, anxiety, feeling very depressed, very low. And those were three things that I never dealt with because I was just so prideful. I never allowed my mind to go there. But once I started using, it was just like, it was so bad, like the come down. And it's horror of MDMA, yeah. So in MDMA and cocaine. So I wouldn't like, I would go through this era where I would be around when I told those friends I would be around a lot, and if I would hang out with them 3 days, like we were doing Molly, we were doing ecstasy, and we were doing coke, and we were drinking, we were doing everything. And one time we went to Vegas and we had a rave, and then we went to a club, and then we were out in the bars for like all night. So we popped pills, we did cocaine, and we drank. So after that, I remember coming back home. This was the worst come down ever because I literally did those three, those three that weekend, and I was getting crazy thoughts like you should just kill yourself, like you're not worth it, and I was driving back from Vegas coming down. It was the worst thing I've ever experienced. I remember I stopped at a gas station because I needed a charger. And when I was there, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like everyone's looking at me. Like they know. It was weird. It was weird thoughts and weird feelings, like so much anxiety and just feeling like people were looking at me. And then when I got home, I remember I was pacing in my room, like back and forth. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm acting like like those people you see on the streets. I remember being in it and just thinking like, wow, this is what people go through on the
wow,
streets and stuff. And yeah, that was a rock bottom for me for sure because I didn't realize how bad it was until I had that come down. And that's when I was like, man, I really need to stop
yeah,
doing these drugs. And this was a point where that guy was already coming into eyebrows was already coming into the friend group. And I'm really grateful for COVID, honestly, because once he got into the friend group, like my friends went into even crazier drugs.
wow,
They were still hanging out during COVID. My parents were so strict, and since I was staying with them, they're like, if you go out, you can't live here.
Wow.
So I didn't want to risk it, especially because of my daughter. But I remember my friend telling me, like, oh, yeah, we started doing K, which is horse tranquilizer. And
Ketamine.
yeah, crazy stuff. And yeah, I was just grateful that I was able to get away from them when I did. So that was my first rock bottom. And
Wow. So how did you get better? How did you get help? What made you how did you change?
honestly, for those drugs, what happened was COVID, and I wasn't going out at all because of my parents. If I wanted to stay, I was staying at my dad's house in Bakersfield, which is also a good thing because I was far away from my friends. So the reason I stopped that is because I stopped going out with them. And I never really was a person to get the drugs myself. It was always the people I was with.
Yeah.
So
So COVID helped you get free.
from MDMA, coke, and those hard drugs,
What
but
about the alcohol? How
not
did you
from
get free from alcohol?
yeah, from alcohol. That's another story. Alcohol and weed. So those were my two go tos during COVID because um, obviously I didn't have access to it. I was in Bakersfield. I don't know anyone in Bakersfield.
Hmm.
Plus, I didn't really see myself popping a pill in my living room and having a good time. So I didn't really like even want it at that point. Plus, that come down was literally probably 2, 3 weeks before the shutdown happened.
Mm.
So I was just like, man, I want nothing to do with that
Yeah.
stuff anymore after that, after I went through that. But alcohol and weed, those are my go tos. And I just really saw myself turning into like, my grandpa or my dad because I was relying on it every night. And I was getting tired. I was getting sick and tired of being tired and the
Mhm.
thoughts I was thinking, and I knew it too. I'm like, this isn't me. This isn't who I am. And even doing it around my daughter, I just felt so guilty. I felt so bad that I was doing it around her, that I was driving with her in my car while I was high. I felt horrible about it. And honestly, I just had an encounter with God,
Mm.
and I remember I was in my bathtub once smoking, and I heard like, just kill yourself, you're not worth it, you're not good enough, you should just kill yourself, you're gonna die from COVID, like crazy thoughts.
Mm.
And I remember finally saying, because I used to watch a lot of Christian testimonies, but I never was like, oh, that can never be me because I just can't stop.
Yeah.
And I was in my bedroom and I was reading a book by Sadie Robertson, actually, and it had the scripture of, "Now I've given you the choice between life and death, blessing and cursing,
Yeah.
curses. Oh, that you would pick life so that your descendants might live." So I was thinking about my daughter even at that time too, and right then and there, in my bedroom in Bakersfield, where I was really at rock bottom with crazy thoughts, depression, getting attacked with suicidal thoughts, I just gave it to God and I said, I want to change. I don't want this anymore, and I want to live for you. And that's really what happened. And that encounter with God changed my life, and everything everything that happened after that is just all God. Even my channel, ending up at the church that I'm at now, Freedom, everything. It's crazy what God has done. And really, it was just surrenderance because alone, I couldn't do it by myself. I was trying to do it by myself, but I couldn't stop. And after that encounter, I threw away my alcohol. I threw away my stizzy, which was still halfway full.
Mm.
I got rid of it, and I decided that I was going to change.
That's awesome. So you got 25, 30 seconds to give one last message to everybody that's watching. Keep in mind there's people here that are trying to get off drugs and alcohol, parents that are trying to help their loved ones, people, friends and family that are trying to get help for people they know. So share something with everybody that could help them.
Well, I would say if you really want to change, the first thing you could do is stop hanging out with the people that are supplying you, whatever they're supplying you. If you change who you hang out with, it will be a lot easier for you to change. Also, don't think you're strong enough to go around those people after you're better. Um, and for parents, I would say is just keep a close eye on your kids, and if they're not sharing with you how they feel and they're very closed off with their feelings and being emotional in front of you, that is a huge red flag. And they might go somewhere else to be able to feel those feelings. So you have to be their safe place. When you're at the point where you're doing so much drugs and you feel like you can't stop, I would say get help. Basically, get help at a treatment center. Get help from a mentor. If you're curious about God or you want to know about God, give God a chance. Read a gospel, whatever you think would help you. But just be open and be honest with yourself and be real about your problem. And don't think that you're okay when you know you're not. So that would be my advice.
Thank you, Vivian. For anyone that needs help, there's a number on the screen. Also, there's links in the bio. There'll be a link for Freedom City Church. There'll be a link for treatment centers, and also a link for Faith with Vivian's channel. So you guys could feel free to like, comment, subscribe, share it with people that need help, share it with someone that might get inspired, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining.
Do I say bye? Bye.
No, don't say bye.
No.
Just kidding.